A year after Britain's last great goodbye, the House of Windsor found itself once again under the merciless gaze of history and of a nation that remembers every symbol, every silence, every gesture. The anniversary of Elizabeth II's passing was never going to be just a date circled on the calendar. It was a test. A test of how the monarchy could survive without the woman who defined constancy for 70 years, and how her heirs would navigate grief, duty, and the unrelenting spotlight of expectation. What unfolded across that week was not a single story but a braid of 3 threads: the Prince of Wales stepping out alone into his grandmother's world of village halls and ordinary lives, the King and Queen choosing Balmoral's granite silence over public ceremony, and the Duke of Sussex returning to a charity stage that refuses to let him drift into irrelevance. Around them swirled sport, sorrow, ritual, and a funeral announcement that quietly cracked open 300 years of religious convention. The Windsors did not speak in one voice, they rarely do. But their actions formed a pattern, and in that pattern lay the future of the monarchy. It began with William. Kensington Palace announced a solo engagement that on paper looked unremarkable, a visit to the Women's Institute at Sunningdale. Yet the date gave it seismic weight. September 8th, the first anniversary of the Queen's death. There were no grand cathedrals, no trumpets, no marble pomp. Instead, a modest hall, trestle tables, sponge cake, and women who have for generations held Britain together with recipes, campaigns, and stubborn good sense. This was not nostalgia, it was a statement. William was choosing the very ground where Elizabeth II had found her most enduring tether to her people. She had joined the WI as a 17-year-old princess in 1943, when ration books ruled and bombers scarred the skies. She had remained a member for 8 decades, presiding over the Sandringham branch, listening, laughing, and treating those annual January meetings as if they were as important as any Privy Council. For her, they were. They connected her monarchy to the country's spine. By walking into that room alone, William signaled that he understood the language his grandmother spoke better than anyone else. This was no ribbon cutting. It was apprenticeship. It was inheritance claimed not by proclamation but by presence. The choice to go alone mattered. Catherine's absence was not a slight but a signal. This was not a husband and wife tableau. It was the heir stepping into his own gravity. His face carried the weight of the date, but his composure was steady. To those watching closely, it was the moment he began to claim the space his grandmother had once occupied, not by mimicking her but by echoing her method: be where the people are real. In a monarchy addicted to image, that is the rarest kind of strategy. It was not glamorous, but it was effective. It reminded Britain that the crown, for all its pageantry, still knows how to breathe at human height. Meanwhile, far from the camera's reach, Balmoral spoke in another register. Charles III and Queen Camilla had retreated to the estate that is both refuge and reliquary, the house that has absorbed more royal grief than any palace in London. Balmoral is where Elizabeth died, and to mark the anniversary there was not retreat but reverence. They were seen at Crathy Kirk, the small stone parish church that has served as the royal family's spiritual anchor in the Highlands for over a century. There were no speeches, no orchestrated tableaus, just the familiar act of kneeling in a pew worn smooth by generations of Windsor knees. The symbolism needed no caption: duty can be performed in Westminster Abbey, but grief belongs here, in the granite quiet of the Highlands, away from the roar of expectation. For a king still finding his rhythm, it was a wise choice. Let his son carry the public flame, he would keep the private vigil. The monarchy spoke in 2 voices but carried one message: remembrance takes many forms. And yet a third voice rose, one that neither harmonized nor clashed but moved on its own parallel line. Harry returned to London to attend the Wellchild Awards, an annual ceremony honoring seriously ill children and their carers. For him, this has been one of the few constants, predating the family split, predating the Californian exile, predating the headlines that refused to let him breathe. At Wellchild, he is not a duke embroiled in feuds. He is simply a patron whose presence is promised, and whose word is kept. The children who walk on stage to receive their awards do not care about Windsor politics. They care that he looks them in the eye and calls them brave. He obliged, as always. In that room, the monarchy's noise falls away. For the families there, Harry's service is intact, untouched by scandal. It is the one platform where his estrangement becomes irrelevant, because the need is too great and the gratitude too immediate. The parallel track remained parallel, but it was not meaningless. It was proof that duty can survive even when relationships fracture. Around these memorial movements, life insisted on being life, unpredictable, exhilarating, cruel. Sport supplied the metaphor. Catherine, as patron of the Rugby Football Union, stood in Brighton to watch England crush Australia. The victory was resounding, the crowd delirious, and her presence a clear reminder that she is as comfortable on the sidelines of sport as she is in the solemnity of Westminster Abbey. William, meanwhile, watched Wales face Fiji in Exeter under his role as patron of the Welsh Rugby Union. The match was a thriller, but it ended in heartbreak. Wales fell, narrowly, valiantly. For William, it was a lesson he knew too well. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but either way you show up, you encourage, you shoulder the disappointment publicly while processing it privately. The contrast between Catherine's triumph and William's setback on the same day was a living metaphor for the monarchy itself. Two roles, two outcomes, one tone, steadiness. The nation does not measure its royals by the scoreboard. It measures them by how they carry both joy and defeat. In that, the Waleses delivered. Threaded through this living tableau was a quieter, older narrative, the farewell ode to Catherine, Duchess of Kent. Her death did not command the headlines of a sovereign's passing, but within the family it was seismic. The palace confirmed that her funeral would take place at Westminster Cathedral on September 16 at 2 o'clock. It will be the first royal Catholic funeral in modern British history. Before that, her coffin would rest in the private chapel at Kensington Palace, the very residence where William and Catherine now live, the house that has seen centuries of royal births, scandals, and sorrows. The symbolism was impossible to miss. A king who is supreme governor of the Church of England will stand inside the Mother Church of English Catholicism to honor his aunt's faith. For 3 centuries, Catholicism was the one disqualification the monarchy could not tolerate. The Act of Settlement of 1701 barred any Catholic from the throne, and for generations even marriage to a Catholic meant disinheritance. Yet here, in 2025, the crown itself will bend to honor the conscience of one of its own. It is not revolution, but it is evolution. And it fits the woman. The Duchess of Kent was not a headline seeker. She was a music teacher, a quiet presence, a woman whose conversion to Catholicism in 1994 was not politics but conviction. Her funeral setting matches her life: personal, principled, profound. To read the week correctly is to see the pattern emerge. William's visit to the WI was not a sentimental nod to his grandmother's hobbies, it was strategy, an apprenticeship in the monarchy's most effective register, the ordinary. The king's retreat to Balmoral was not weakness but wisdom, a reminder that not all grief must be consumed by the public. Harry's well-child appearance was not a subplot but a through line, proof that service survives scandal. The Duchess of Kent's funeral was not just a farewell but a widening of the monarchy's aperture, a signal that tradition can stretch without snapping. Even the rugby carried the metaphor forward: triumph and defeat, steadiness regardless. The monarchy, fractured in image, remains coherent in function. It adapts, it bends, it endures. For those who listen to symbols, the week was rich. William keeps choosing rooms where the crown meets Britain at eye level. Charles insists that some anniversaries deserve silence rather than spectacle. Harry continues to serve in the spaces that have always needed him. And the institution prepares to bury a duchess whose faith will, in death, rewrite a piece of royal history. None of this was coincidence. It was the monarchy doing what it has always done when tested, speaking in actions rather than declarations, stitching together grief and duty into a fabric strong enough to hold another year. The late Queen used to say that grief is the price we pay for love. This week showed that grief is also the price of continuity. A monarchy cannot pause, it cannot indulge itself in endless mourning. It must transform private sorrow into public steadiness. That is what we saw, in sponge cakes and rugby matches, in granite chapels and cathedral rites, in charity halls and private vigils. The Windsor family is not united in sentiment, but it is united in function. And for a monarchy, that is what matters most. The show does not go on. The work does. And in 3 voices, village hall, granite quiet, and awards night brave, the work was done.